Namaste and welcome to OM Dharma YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to understand the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita in simple English. No tongue-twisting verses, just crisp conclusions that you can easily understand and relate to your day-to-day life. The first chapter establishes that our inability to deal with conflicts is the root cause of all sorrows and sufferings in this world. Let me explain. Normally, we experience conflicts at three levels: materialistic level, mental level, and at spiritual level. Conflict is everywhere in nature at material level. For example, atoms collide against atoms, weeds take over carefully manicured flowers, animals fight for control of territory, and we humans have disagreements with our children, siblings, spouses, bosses, co-workers, between states, and even countries. To deal with such conflicts, we need to learn how to act and what to say in any situation. How we conduct ourselves in material conflicts is largely dependent on the state of our minds. The mental conflict is primarily between our rational side and our ego. The ego is the part of our mind that either oversimplifies or exaggerates situations and responds to every situation with a fight or flight reaction. It shuts off the rational part of our mind that can think logically and clearly. So chapter 1 emphasizes Arjun's dilemma. When confronting the material conflict of battle, Arjun's rational mind was clear. He was a warrior and he had entered the battlefield to fight a war against the enemy for a just cause. But when he saw his family on the enemy's side, he experienced mental conflict. The dilemma was, should I kill my family or should I perform my duty? Eventually his ego intensified and it took the control away from his rational mind. It made him say, "It is better to run away and become a monk than to perform my duty." The inability to reconcile this conflict in his mind led to his mental breakdown in the middle of the battlefield. He could not commit to fighting, and being unable to decide, he wanted to quit. Haven't even you experienced situations like this in your life? So then conflict at material level and at the mental level is pervasive. It is an integral part of life. We cannot escape it. So then should we just accept it? The clue to this lies in the first chapter itself, where Shri Krishna positions Arjun literally in the middle of the two armies, at a point from which Arjun can see his dearest teachers and relatives on the other side of the battlefield. This immediately triggers the third type of conflict. Not material conflict, neither mental, but that of an identity. Arjun now thinks to himself, who am I? Am I the warrior fighting for a just cause? Or am I the beloved student of my teacher? If I am that warrior, I should be in the Pandav army. If I am that beloved student and relative, I should be in the Kaurav army. But I am both. What should I do? Since I don't know how to reconcile my identity, let me quit. It is the easiest option I have. Quitting is the default response of the ego. In his speech to Sri Krishna, Arjun used logic to justify his quitting the battle. This is what many of us do. We run away from our conflicts and use logic or even God or religion, a whole host of rationalizations to justify our quitting to ourselves and to others. This confusion of identity is nothing but spiritual conflict. Unless we know who we are, what God is, what's our connection to God, we will never be able to completely resolve all of our material and mental conflicts. And this is the central theme of this first chapter. So in conclusion, conflict is everywhere, and we have to learn to handle it. The sooner we recognize this universal truth about conflict and its impact, the sooner we can progress in our personal, professional, and ultimately spiritual journeys. But the question is, how exactly are we going to do it? And the answer to this lies in the second chapter. But before we proceed, hit the like button if you could relate to Arjun's situation and consider subscribing OM Dharma YouTube channel to know how Shri Krishna responds to Arjun's misguided speech. Also, if you've liked the video, share it with your loved ones. The second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is an extremely important chapter, perhaps the most important chapter of all. It is the longest chapter and it introduces most of the key themes of the Gita at high level. The rest of the Gita picks up these themes and elaborates on them. It includes a mix of practical as well as spiritual aspects of life. As we saw in the first chapter, Arjun had discarded his weapons in the battlefield. 2.1 is spoken by Sanjay and it literally means this. To him who was possessed with grief and pity and having tear-filled confused eyes, Madhusudan spoke these words. Now in this chapter, Sanjay explains Arjun's state to Dhritarashtra, saying, the world's mightiest warrior is struck by grief and is actually crying. This state affected Arjun's entire personality. Physically because he had tears, emotionally because he was struck with grief and pity, and intellectually because he was confused about what to do and what not to do. So in 2.2, Lord Krishna says, from where has this weakness arisen at this inconvenient time, Arjun? It is not noble. It's not going to get you to heaven, nor it will earn you any valor. Just look at the kind of words Sri Krishna used here. They were not the words of kindness. They were not the words of sympathy or support. They were tough, provocative words, meant to shake Arjun out of his deluded state of mind. They were intended to inform Arjun that his assessment of this situation and his plan of exiting from the situation were totally incorrect and invalid. This teaches us an important lesson. Tailor the message to the audience. We know that Arjun is a tough warrior, right? And tough talk is the only language he understands. An analogy would be a coach providing directions to a player in the middle of a football game. He would use tough talk, not sympathetic talk. So Sri Krishna also emphasizes that the timing of Arjun's fall into sorrow is not appropriate. If he wanted to express any emotion towards his kinsman, he had a lot of time to do so prior to the battle. Once in this battle, this behavior was unwarranted. So in 2.3 he further says, don't yield to this effeminate behavior, Parth. It is not worthy of you. Cast off this petty weakness of heart and arise, scorcher of foes. Lord Krishna, exhibiting the quality of an expert motivational speaker that he was, he used a carrot and stick approach towards Arjun. One of the worst things you can call a warrior is effeminate. Even young boys playing sports don't want to hear someone saying, hey, you throw a ball like a girl. So using that taunting words and using the adjective weak-hearted to describe Arjun was another jolt to the usually courageous and lion-hearted warrior. But Sri Krishna also appealed to Arjun's better qualities by addressing him as Parth. Just for the record, Pritha is another name of Kunti, Arjun's mother. By calling Arjun as Parth, he reminded Arjun of his esteemed and respected mother, and how she would feel if Arjun shied away from the war. Sri Krishna also reminded Arjun of his battle prowess, and he called him a scorcher of foes. This again teaches us a very important lesson, and that is to motivate your friends in the times of their sorrow and confusion. Hit them hard if the need be with your words, but also make them realize that they can do it. In 2.4, Arjun says, how can I fight against Bhishma and Drona with arrows, O Madhusudan? Both of them are worthy of worship, O Arisudan. Arjun uses the words slayer of demon Madhu and slayer of foes to address Krishna. What he means to say is that it is very easy to slay evil individuals but difficult to slay one's own men. Arjun was still holding on to the familial and teacher-student relationships even in the battlefield. But on the Kaurav side, Bhishma and Drona viewed Arjun only as an enemy. Can we relate this to an example from our lives? Just think of a father and a mother who have brought up their children and, like any responsible parents, guided them to what was right and what was wrong. When the children grow into adults, they now possess the ability to think for themselves, and on occasions they will consult their parents on decisions that they need help with. But similar to Arjun's attachment to his elders, if the parents still hold on to the relationships that existed when their children were young, the children would not consider that to be appropriate behavior, and this could impact their relationship with their parents right now. So thus we learn that firm detachment with the materialistic world and emotions is necessary if one has to reach his goals in life. In 2.5 he further says, I will not kill my revered teachers. Rather in this world, I would prefer to eat food received through alms rather than enjoy the blood-stained worldly pleasures derived from killing my teachers. Now it seems that Arjun's panic attack has ended and his emotional state has become somewhat normal. Arjun is slowly opening up to logical reasoning and his agitations have subsided. The lesson here is that we cannot have a sane conversation with someone in a charged emotional state. Their mind has to calm down in order to create room for logic. So one must never waste his time and energy on making a person understand anything when he is in an emotionally charged state. Just wait for him to calm down and then make your points. In 2.6 he says, I do not know which is the better of the two, to conquer them or to be conquered by them. Dhritarashtra's sons stand here before us. I certainly don't wish to live after killing them. Now Arjun has moved from his hardline decision of not fighting at all to having a dilemma. Arjun respected his teachers and elders. They gave him pleasure, but now they were in front of him, ready to kill him. Similarly, behind every pleasure-filled person, experience or object we encounter lies its negative aspect. We face questions like that all the time. For instance, a boss may like an employee, but the business will sink if he does not fire him. Should he fire him or not? Questions like this arise all the time. Life is nothing but a series of actions driven by day-to-day decisions we take. Let's see what solution Krishna provides for this. Again in 2.7, Arjun says, This error of cowardice has damaged my personality and my deluded intellect cannot decide what is right or wrong. Tell me what is definitely appropriate. Guide me, I am your disciple, and take refuge in you. Now Arjun has come back to his senses and has accepted that emotion and mental dilemma has maligned his courage and is willing to correct it with the guidance of Lord Krishna, considering him to be his guardian. So a very important lesson to be learnt here is one must first accept his flaws and take steps to correct them to become a better self. If required, one must take advice from the experienced and wise people around him, keeping his ego aside. In the next few shlokas, Arjun just elaborates on his mental state and more or less translation itself is explanatory. In 2.8 he says, even if I should obtain prosperity and unreviled kingship of earth or even supremacy over the gods, I do not see that it will dry away the sorrow that withers my senses. Further in 2.11, Lord Krishna says, You are grieving for those who are not worthy of sorrow. Yet you are seemingly speaking words of wisdom. The wise neither grieve for departed nor for those who have not yet departed. So far, Arjun thought he was wise in avoiding the war by making a plea for peace. But Krishna pointed out that Arjun seemingly spoke wise words. That is, in reality, what Arjun said was not correct. His assessment of the situation was clouded by emotion instead of being driven by logic and reason. On one hand, he was displaying grief. On the other hand, he was trying to display logic. So logic and grief cannot go together. There are several instances in life where once what we thought was correct no longer applies. Let's say it's your first day at work and you get invited to 10 meetings from different teams. If you were at a job right out of the college, you would ensure that you attended all the meetings that you were invited to. And doing so would be the right thing to do at that stage in your career. Now consider another situation where you get promoted to your first managerial job. Now, as a manager, you have the advantage of seniority to choose which meetings to go to and which ones to avoid. You no longer assess the situations like you did previously. You use different reasoning and logic. Here Sri Krishna corrects Arjun's logic. He pointed to Arjun that there was no need to grieve for the living or for the death, as death is inevitable. We should enjoy and appreciate the living, just like one appreciates a colorful soap bubble blown by a child. The bubble will last for a few seconds, but inevitably it is going to burst. Some bubbles burst quickly, some last for a little longer time, but there is never a surprise when a bubble eventually bursts. So what we learn from here is that we have to assess any life situation with logic and reason. And we must not get swayed by emotions. Of course, it will not always be possible to check our emotions, but it should be what we should strive for constantly. Letting emotions run wild results in panic attack. Krishna now introduces the concept of Atma in the next shlokas. So in 2.13, he says, just as in this body, the body dweller passes through childhood, youth and old age, so also does it obtain another body, that is after death. The steadfast person does not grieve over this. The previous verse to this verse, that is 2.12, he says, in fact, there was never a time when I or you or these kings did not exist, and never shall we cease to exist hereafter. What he's trying to convey is that Atma is eternal. One of the important aspects of Hinduism is the concept of rebirth. Lord Krishna explains in these verses why one should not grieve over anything. Everything that exists today has been existing since forever and is still going to exist forever. The only thing that changes is its form. Now consider Atma to be the energy that keeps us alive. Once the Atma leaves the body, the person dies. But the Atma takes up a new body. So it's like saying energy can never be created nor it can be destroyed. It can just be converted from one form to another. Verses 14 to 30 are quite self-explanatory, and it is just an elaboration about what is Atma. So we'll just read some of those verses. In 2.14 he says, contact with material objects will only give joy and sorrow, heat and cold. These are transitory. They appear and disappear, so endure them bravely. In 2.15, therefore, the one who is not agitated by the material objects can remain balanced in joy and sorrow. That wise person is fit for immortality. 2.16 reads, the unreal has no existence, and the real never ceases to exist. The truth about both of these has been experienced by seers of the Atma. 2.18 reads, these bodies of the eternal soul will perish, it is said. But the soul is imperishable and unfathomable. Therefore fight, O Bharat. 2.19 says, a person who believes that the eternal essence, which is another word for Atma, slays or that it is slain, does not know the truth. It neither slays nor it is slain. In 2.20, the eternal essence is neither born, nor does it ever die, nor is it that having come into existence, neither it will again cease to exist. It is birthless, eternal, changeless, and primeval. It is not slain when the body is killed. And 2.22, just as an individual discards old clothes and wears new ones, so does the soul discard old bodies and obtain other new bodies. From verse 14 through 30, Sri Krishna clarifies multiple times that what we consider to be our relations is just a temporary form of the greater form, which is Atma, or soul in simple terms. Thus, killing the bodies of your opponents is only the end of their body's existence, while the soul is eternal and no one is able to destroy it. So you must fight and not care about death, neither yours nor that of your opponents. In 2.31, Lord Krishna says, furthermore, you should not be disturbed when you consider your duty, because there is no other glory for a warrior than a righteous war. Now, having established the facts in previous verses, Lord Krishna now emphasizes that the duty of the form the Atma has assumed for the time being is of prime importance. This teaches us to be focused on our goal and not to deviate from it for the things that are not in our control. Further, in 2.33 to 2.36, Krishna says, on the other hand, if you do not undertake this righteous war, then by getting away from your duty and valor, you will incur sin. Everyone will speak about your infamy forever. This will be a great sorrow, worse even than death for an honorable person. Great warriors will believe that you disengaged from war due to cowardice. Even though they once regarded you highly, they will now look down upon you. Your enemies will say many unspeakable things about you. They will condemn your prowess. What could be a greater sorrow than this? To make an argument forceful, convincing, and persuasive, one has to incorporate three elements: emotion, logic, and the repetition of the speaker. After having used logic in his teachings, Sri Krishna uses a call to emotion as a tool of persuasion. Aristotle said something similar to this. I guess his inspiration could have been the Bhagavad Gita. For a great warrior like Arjun, repetition was everything. Therefore, Sri Krishna advised Arjun to remember his swadharma. Now, swadharma is a Sanskrit term wherein swa means self and dharma is the path that you take to achieve the goals that you set for yourself. Sri Krishna advised Arjun to remember his swadharma, that is his duty, and fight, or else he would lose his reputation as a mighty warrior. We can learn so much from the way Sri Krishna builds and delivers his arguments to Arjun. Now see how we can learn so much from the way Sri Krishna builds and delivers his arguments to Arjun. Whenever we have to make a presentation at work or to convince a spouse or parents for something that is important to us, it is always better to use a mix of logic and emotion in our arguments rather than just choose one or the other. While facing tough situations, our natural instinct is to move away from action towards inaction. There is always a hesitation, sometimes procrastination, and usually this hesitation is caused by a fear of failure or fear of trying something that we have not done before. But Sri Krishna advises us that as long as we are performing actions that are aligned to our swadharma, which is our duty, action is always preferable over inaction or procrastination. The outcome of performing an action in accordance with our duty will always be favorable. In 238, he says, treat joy or sorrow, gain or loss, victory or defeat with equanimity, and then engage in war. By doing so, you will not incur sin. Now, this is one of the most important shlokas in the second chapter and perhaps in the entire Gita. In essence, Sri Krishna instructed Arjun to maintain equanimity, not just in war but in any circumstance in life. We encounter joy, sorrow, victory, defeat, gain or loss almost every day, even several times a day, in fact. And each time we encounter any of these situations, we get emotionally and sometimes even physically affected by them. At work, a meeting with your boss does not go well, for example. But on another day, your boss gives you an exemplary speech on a project well executed. So how can we possibly treat these two situations as equal? Sri Krishna fully understands this point. Here, he only lays out the ultimate goal for us, the goal of equanimity, or treating each and every life situation equally without getting agitated. Now that we know what the goal is, he will gently guide us through the path of practical advice throughout the rest of the teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. So in 239, Krishna says, the knowledge has been stated to you. Now listen to the discipline of action. Having equipped yourself with this understanding, you will cast off your bonds of action. Lord Krishna uses this shlok to conclude the theoretical aspect of logic and reasoning. The remaining shlokas in the second chapter are extremely practical and can be immediately used in our daily lives. They will enable us to conduct our swadharma while always keeping the attitude specified in the prior shlok, which is treat any situation, joyful or sorrowful, with equanimity. There's an interesting word in the last part of the shlok, bonds of action. So what is this bondage? An action that increases extreme attachment or hatred towards anything, whether it's an object or a person or a situation, it binds us to that thing. It is similar to addiction. For example, we may smoke a cigarette once, but unless we have high self-control, we want to experience it again. This desire to repeat the experience eventually results in an addiction, and we cannot live without it. The important point here is that no action or object can bind us. It is the thought behind it that binds us. So for a non-smoker, a pack of cigarettes does not cause any bondage. Whereas for a smoker, just the sight of the pack of cigarettes prompts him to smoke. So it's not the pack of cigarettes that is the culprit. It is your point of view which is the main culprit towards your addiction. Consider an executive making a presentation to the management team. And let's assume there are two scenarios. In one scenario could be that he makes the presentation with the motive of getting a promotion. Another scenario could be that he makes the presentation with the motive of increasing the sales of the corporation so that it benefits all the stakeholders. In the first case, the action binds him. And in the second case, it does not. Or alternatively, let's consider a musician who is performing on a stage. Now, if he performs with the sole motive to get applause and get nominated for an award, the action will bind him. But if he performs with the sole motive of entertaining the audience and honoring his craft, the action is not going to bind him. Lord Krishna gently reveals the technique of cutting off these bindings in the rest of the chapter. So in verse number 40, he says, "There is no loss of effort, nor is there any negative result. Even a little of this knowledge protects one from the most massive fear." Lord Krishna reassures to Arjun that the teachings of Buddhi Yoga is absolutely risk-free. It will not result in abhikram nash or error caused by not following the steps correctly. Neither it will create pratyavaha dosh, that is yielding a negative result. Therefore, there is absolutely no excuse for holding back in implementing these teachings. Even if one practices a little bit of these teachings, it may protect us from the most massive fear, that is the fear of death. In verse number 41, he says, "The thoughts of the determined are focused. The thoughts of the irresolute are many-branched and infinite." So Lord Krishna explains that an individual who is determined towards his dharma or goal has a focused thought process, while the one who isn't determined or dedicated towards his goal has many irrelevant thoughts. Now, for instance, when Mr. X visits the grocery store with a shopping list, he quickly and efficiently gets the items on the list and leaves the store. He is focused on acquiring the objects in his shopping list. But when he visits the mall or an electronic store, his mind starts entertaining many branched and infinite thoughts, as it is said in the verse. For instance, "Oh, look at this new iPod. Can I get it cheaper here? When's the new HD TV coming out?" etc. And eventually ends up spending over 3 hours in the mall. Therefore, focus is extremely important in any endeavor. Now let's assume we focus on the one desire to maintain equanimity. How do we know whether we are on the right track? At some point every day, preferably at the end of the day, we should ask ourselves these two questions and write down the answers to these questions in a journal. The first question is this: what objects or people or situations did I keep obsessing about today? So that's the first question. And the second question is, how many of these obsessive thoughts did I have? So the first question is a qualitative one. It asks you what objects or people or situations did you keep obsessing about today? And the second question is quantitative. How many of these obsessive thoughts did you have? Now, if we notice over time that the quantity of our obsessive thinking has begun to diminish, it means that our intellect is beginning to focus on treating every situation with equanimity. Now, verses 42 through 44 read as follows, and what they mean is this: the unwise utter flowery statements that are only interested in the Veda-related topics, saying that there is nothing else. Those who harbor material desires and hold heaven as the ultimate goal perform actions that result in rebirth. They describe various actions for obtaining pleasure and power. But those who are extremely attached to pleasure and power, who are attracted to these flowery words, do not possess a determined intellect and will never achieve samadhi. So Lord Krishna explained the importance of focus in the prior shloka. Here he describes the tendencies that will prevent someone from having that focus. In essence, what he is saying is that any individual who thinks about one material desire after another will never reach the state of absolute equanimity. The word used in the shlok to describe the state is samadhi. So samadhi is nothing but the state of equanimity, the ultimate state of equanimity that a person can experience. And what is equanimity? Treating everything equally, whether it is joy or sorrow. Most of our youth is spent in gaining worldly knowledge. In the Gita, Vedas can be interpreted as worldly knowledge from our standpoint. This knowledge is useful for performing our swadharma through our chosen profession. But most of us end up using this knowledge as a means to fulfill a never-ending stream of material desires that will give us more and more pleasure and power. Our goal is never swadharma itself, it is material desires. And with each material desire, the shlok says that we are reborn. The word rebirth here has a specific meaning, okay? Each time you harbor a new material desire, you are reborn. This is because each new material desire prompts you towards a whole new set of selfishly motivated actions, taking the focus away from your swadharma. And in doing so, moving you away from the ultimate goal of maintaining equanimity. Now, just for instance, if you want a new car, you are reborn as a car-desiring individual who will put in extra efforts to earn extra money for a new car. By the time the new car has arrived, several new desires have sprung up, resulting in new rebirths. Now the shloka also mentions that such individuals hold heaven as the ultimate goal. Just for explanation, the word heaven also has a specific meaning here. It does not refer to some place up in the sky. It refers to a future state where you will be happy after you fulfill your desires. But by shifting your focus towards heaven, that is the future, you make your present moment unhappy. This kind of thinking also prompts you towards selfishly motivated actions. Therefore, these shlokas reiterate the importance of keeping a focused attitude towards maintaining equanimity. And one does that by not harboring endless material desires. In verse number 45, he says, the Vedas describe the three gunas. Transcend those gunas, Arjun. Free yourself from dualities, remain always in sattva, give up thinking about acquisition and preservation, and be established in the eternal essence. Lord Krishna now provides us with the second technique, slowly improving the quality of our thoughts. Let's understand this shloka part by part. Firstly, an absolute prerequisite to improving thought quality is to be mindful of what we are thinking. Most of us tend to perform actions daily on an autopilot mode. If we are not aware of what we are thinking while performing an action, we will not be able to improve the quality of our thoughts. Therefore, the shlok advises us to think deeply about whether any action we perform is selfish or is in service of our swadharma. Doing so repeatedly will reveal the true nature of our thoughts. Secondly, the shloka advises us to go beyond obsessive thinking about the interplay of the three gunas. Just a quick reference, there are three types of gunas or tendencies that are responsible for creating everything in this material world. Therefore, the shlok advises us to start contemplating spiritual knowledge daily, which will automatically reduce material thoughts. Thirdly, the shloka speaks about dualities. Dualities are the positive and negative mental labels associated with thoughts. Love versus hate, joyful versus sorrowful, pleasurable versus painful, and so on. So practically speaking, any thought that demonstrates extreme attachment or hatred towards an object or a person or a situation is a poor quality of thought because it strengthens the ego. Whenever we catch ourselves saying something like, I cannot live without TV, or I cannot live without watching TV every day, we should be on guard. It is better to substitute that thought with something like, I enjoy watching TV, but I can live without it if I want to. Similarly, if we have a thought like, I want to kill my boss, we can start to think, okay, my boss is difficult to work with sometimes, but he's a human being after all, just like anyone else. Finally, the shloka advises us to stop worrying about acquisition and preservation. Now, most of us are worried about two things, acquiring something and preserving something once it is acquired. Say for instance, a corporate executive will keep thinking about the promotion. And once he has it, he will do all he can do to make sure that he holds his position. But the shloka informs us that as long as we are diligently performing our swadharma, we will automatically get what we need to live a good life. Therefore, we should stop obsessing over acquisition and preservation, which is an impediment to maintaining equanimity. Let's summarize the techniques learned so far. The first technique helps us to reduce the quantity of unnecessary thought. The second technique helps us to improve the quality of our thoughts by substituting poor quality thoughts with good quality thoughts. It is helpful to maintain a diary to track the quantity and quality of our thoughts so that we can gauge our progress. It is no different than following a disciplined approach to losing weight or quitting smoking. So now there might be some questions that might arise, and one of the most typical questions that people come up with is, how can I stop thinking about the material world after I perform my swadharma? After I come home from work, I need to watch TV, I need to surf the web, watch movies or sports, etc. in order to be entertained. Won't life become boring? So answer to this question is provided in the next shlok. Shlok number 46 says, just like there is no use for a well when water is flooding everywhere, so does a Brahman when he knows all the contents of the Vedas. Now think about your childhood. All of us had a craving for toys when we were kids, right? But there came a stage when most of us outgrew toys because we began to think about higher things like career aspirations and stuff like that, salary, etc. So all toys began to look the same to us, regardless of the price or shape or size or color or brand or anything. So from a simple spinning top to an expensive model aeroplane, everything was similar for us. So in the same way, Krishna says that once our thoughts become high in quality, that is, they pertain to our swadharma and to spiritual contemplation, we will automatically begin to feel less need for any external entertainment and enjoyment. In 2.47, Lord Krishna says, you only have authority over action, not ever to the result. Don't be motivated by the result and don't get attached to inaction. Now this shloka is probably the most known shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. There are several messages in this shloka, so let's examine the teaching part by part. In the first half of the shlok, Lord Krishna says that we have authority only over the actions performed by us, but never on the result. In other words, we do not have complete control over the outcome of any activity. As we grow older and spend more time in this world, we know this fact instinctively. But because we forget it, we tend to get disappointed when things don't go our way, or get elated when things do go our way. Now just look at our own lives. We can take any number of examples to test this theory. Take a simple thing as catching a bus that has a ride on the other side of the road. We run to catch the bus, but even in such a simple task, the outcome is not guaranteed. If we are able to catch the bus, then all's well. But there are several other outcomes as well that we must think of. The bus may leave before we get to the stop. That's one possibility. Or we could catch the wrong bus in a hurry. And worst of all, we could get hit by a car while crossing the road. Or consider a complex task such as a surgeon performing heart surgery. Now take the world's best doctor, trained at the world's best college, in the surgery room of the world's best hospital with the world's best surgery team. Even with all these world best things, the surgeon will not have 100% success rate. He will never have 100% success rate. The outcome of any action is like an equation where we provide some of the variables but not all of them. In fact, we may not even know all the variables that end up determining the outcome. So unless we logically convince ourselves that we do not have complete control over the result of an action, we will not be able to learn the main teachings of the second half of the shlok. In the second half of the shlok, Lord Krishna urges us not to worry about the outcome, that is, the result of the action. We've seen earlier that when we perform our swadharma, we derive joy from the performance of the action itself. We have the interest, we have the desire and aptitude for it. But we also learned that we do not have complete control over the outcome. So we should never be motivated by the outcome when we know we have executed our actions with perfection and that we do not have complete control on the outcome. Motivation from the outcome creates bondage. It is like a rope that ties us into the future. Instead, if we give up motivation for the outcome, there is no such binding created. There is nothing wrong with aiming for a specific goal or even to be inspired by it. Setting a vision, defining a goal, making a plan, all these things are absolutely required for the perfect execution of any work. We can always be motivated by the goal, but not be motivated by the outcome of that goal. There is a subtle but important difference between the two. If we know that we have performed our swadharma and our actions to the best of our ability, we know that in the end we will achieve our goals, even if sometimes things may not turn out as anticipated. But we should never totally give up and do nothing. In the upcoming shloks, Lord Krishna elaborates on the previous shlok and explains in details how following the teachings in the previous shlok are beneficial and how not following them is not. So many of the translations are self-explanatory, so we'll just read them once. 2.48 reads, or it translates to, perform action established in yoga and discard attachment. Remain balanced in success and failure. Yoga is defined as equanimity. 249 means, selfish action is far lower than unselfish action. Seek refuge in the knowledge of equanimity. Pitiable are those who are motivated by results. 250 says, one who is equipped with equanimity in this life discards both merit and sin. Therefore remain established in yoga. Yoga results in perfect action. 251 says, thus the wise individual who performs actions with equanimity is liberated from the entanglements of birth and attains the immaculate state. 252 means, when your intellect has completely crossed over the quagmire of delusion, then you will become indifferent to what has been heard and what is to be heard. And finally, in 2.54, Arjuna asks, what is the description of a person of steady wisdom? One who is established in equanimity, O Keshav. How does that person of steady intellect speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? To this, Lord Krishna said in 255, when an individual gives up all desires that enter the mind and is self-satisfied in his own self, that individual is called a person of steady wisdom. From this shlok onwards, Lord Krishna lists all the factors that can destabilize our state of equanimity. If we keep track of these factors and remain alert and aware when we encounter them, then we will never lose our mental balance and equanimity. In this shlok, Shri Krishna advises us to monitor our material desires, that is, track how many are arising, how many we have fulfilled, and so on. Continual harboring of material desires has the effect of destabilizing our mental balance and it takes us further away from the state of equanimity. So a man of steady wisdom is the one who has learned to give up all such desires. Since this person of steady wisdom has extinguished all his desires, he is always content and does not need to rush out into the world of material objects. This is because he has realized his association with the eternal essence, which pervades the entire universe and therefore is always complete and content. Therefore, he will be self-satisfied in his own self. Next shlokas are again an elaboration of the previous shloka and are more or less self-explanatory, so we shall read them for you. 56 reads, "One whose mind is not agitated in sorrow and remains indifferent in joy and is free from attachment, fear and anger, that contemplative individual is known as a person of steady intellect." In 57 he says, "He who remains without affection everywhere is not elated in gain and is not dejected in loss, his wisdom is steady." So these are the same things which Lord Krishna is repeating over and over so that every individual understands the true gist of what he wants to say. In 58 he says, "Just like a tortoise withdraws its limbs from all the sides, the one who withdraws his senses from objects attains a steady intellect." In 59 he says, "Objects turn away from the fasting individual, but their taste remains. For the individual who has realized the Absolute, the taste also turns away." And in 60, he says, "For the senses are so turbulent that they forcibly seize the mind of even a wise individual who perseveres." Now this is a very important shlok. In this shlok, Lord Krishna says that thoughts can catch us at a time of weakness, when we are least alert and undo all of our self-control. These thoughts are generated by our predispositions or vasanas. Vasanas are like dormant embers of coal that burn stronger when senses add fuel to their fire. They are the seeds of thoughts or thought generators. This means that self-control of actions is effective, but only to a certain extent, because self-control does not tackle vasanas. It is like trimming a weed instead of directly uprooting it completely. One may practice conquering one's senses for a long time. That person can become an advanced practitioner through years of diligence and perseverance. He may think that all of his desires and vasanas have vanished, but the senses and the mind are extremely clever. They will wait for months, even years, and then generate a thought that can destabilize his equanimity in a second. So in conclusion, it's not enough to control our actions in order to maintain equanimity. We have to remain alert and watch our thoughts as well. In 261, Lord Krishna says, "The disciplined individual should restrain them all and sit with devotion to me. Having brought the senses under control, his wisdom is steady." 62 and 63 translate as follows, "When a man constantly thinks about objects, attachment for those objects arises. From attachment is born desire, and from desire is born anger. From anger comes delusion, from delusion comes loss of memory, from loss of memory comes destruction of intellect, and once the intellect is destroyed, the person perishes." In 265 he says, "But the one whose mind and senses are under control is devoid of attraction or revulsion. He moves around objects and gains the state of tranquility. Having gained tranquility, all of his sorrows are destroyed, his mind is joyful, and his intellect soon becomes steady." So again in these preceding shlokas, the same message is repeated again and again. The bottom line is this: one must control his desires in a manner explained in the previous shlokas. Verse number 266 to 268 once again emphasize the drawbacks of not following what Lord Krishna has established a number of times. The only difference is that every time there is a different corollary drawn, so that the reader gets it the one way or the other way. It reads as follows. 266 translates, "The individual whose mind and senses are not controlled cannot have a focused intellect. Without a focused intellect, he cannot meditate, and without meditation there is no peace. How can there be happiness without peace?" 267 translates to, For even one of the wandering senses overpowers the mind and steals away wisdom, like wind affects a ship in water. 268 translates, Therefore, O mighty armed warrior, one who always restrains his senses from objects, his wisdom is steady. 269 translates, That which is night for all beings, the balanced individual is awake in that, and that in which all beings are awake, the person of contemplation views as night. In this shlok, Lord Krishna is speaking about two groups of individuals, the ones who maintain the state of equanimity and the ones who do not. Both groups have to live in this world of material objects, and both of them have to face ups and downs in their life. The key difference in both groups is their vision. For most individuals, the world of material objects is their end goal. They are awake to it, and the eternal essence is like night to them. But for the individuals who follow equanimity, the world of material objects loses importance. That world is like night to them. They are awake to the timeless, changeless, and eternal essence. Further elaboration of the above thought is given in verse number 270, and it reads like this, or it translates to, Just like the ocean remains unmoved, the water enters it from all sides, so does that tranquil individual attain peace in whom all desires enter, but not the desire of desires. In 271, that individual who walks having abandoned all desires, cravings, mindness, and ego, he attains peace. 72 translates, Having attained this state of Brahman, one never gets deluded. If one gets established in this state, even at the time of death, he attains oneness with Brahman. This concludes the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Hit the like button if you've liked the explanation. Also share it with your friends and family and subscribe to OM Dharma for upcoming chapters.